knee-deep with his cast net, and he's throwing the net out. We talked about it yesterday. You have the picture in the blue book. He says, follow me, I'll make you fishers of men. Listen to that metaphor. I'll make you fishers of men. He continues on a little bit, and he comes to Zebedee with his sons James and John. And he's going to call them too, and they're going to follow him. And then he continues on, and it says they entered Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, they went into the synagogue. So we did all of that yesterday, but I just wanted you to be on the piece of the lake shore where I think we might have these guys. So now the metaphor that they start out with, I'm going to make you fishers of men. John 21, how does the metaphor shift? Remember I told you yesterday. Now feed my sheep.
Yeah.
So we have the three statements. Peter, do you love me? Yes. Yes, Lord, I love you. Feed my sheep. You love me. Yes, Lord, I love you. Feed my sheep. Peter, do you love me? Yes, Lord, I love you. Feed my lambs. Peter the fisherman is being called to being a shepherd. So there's a change in the metaphor that Jesus uses with him. It's not lost on Peter either. How does Peter refer to the master in 1 Peter? He calls him the great shepherd. Yeah. So and then he speaks to those who are shepherds. Yeah, that's good. So Peter hasn't lost this image that Jesus gave him here, the vision that Jesus gave him here. I like to think in terms of up on this rock is where the Byzantines, remember, Jesus has prepared the fish. The disciples are out fishing, and the master calls out, "You caught anything?" "No." "Well, throw your net on the other side." They do. They catch a lot. John says to Peter, "It's the master." Peter, who has stripped himself down because he's in the process of diving down to get the cast net, what they'll do is they'll lay this trammel net, so it's like a corral out there, and then they can use the cast net. The fishermen on the lake think that's what was going on, because if it was a draw net, if it was the drag net, they wouldn't be out in the lake. They would have laid the drag net, and they'd be pulling it in, right? But they're out there, they've laid the trammel net, and they're in the process of catching the fish within that trammel net. How then they pull in the trammel net, maybe that's what, they pull in the trammel net and they end up with this catch of 153 fish. But old Mendel Noon tells us Peter's been stripped down because he's doing some swimming. And when he sees the master, he covers himself. And then he swims to shore. And the others bring the fish load in. And then Jesus says, Jesus already has some fish. I don't know how he got his.
Picked up a couple rocks.
He's cooking some fish. And then he says, bring some more fish. So Peter goes out and drags that net up, and they had 153 fish. They eat. The disciples stretch out in the shade. I refer to my brother again, who's a very engaging writer, and he'd written a number of apostle stories, and he says, the disciples stretched out and slept. James was the first to fall asleep, which with that statement, he's foreshadowing James as the first of the disciples to die. And then we see Peter and Jesus walking away, and John doesn't want to be left out, so instead of falling asleep, he's following at a little distance. And so Jesus begins his questioning of Peter. And at the end, he has a word about Peter's death. So when he finishes with the questioning, he says, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said, follow me. And Peter, according to church tradition, is crucified, but requests to be crucified upside down, so that I guess out of so that he won't be crucified as Jesus, but in a humbler condition. But Peter's not quite there. Peter turned and saw that the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. This was the one who had leaned back against Jesus at supper and said, Lord, who is going to betray you? When Peter saw him, he asked, Lord, what about him? Jesus answered, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me. Because of this, the rumors spread among the brothers that this disciple would not die. But Jesus did not say that he would not die. He only said, if I want him to return alive until I return, what is that to you? This is the disciple who testifies to these things and who wrote them down. We know that his testimony is true. You can hear there one of John's disciples who has edited this work and put it together. And he's saying, John wrote these things down. We know that his testimony was true, okay? Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written. So, John lived to be a very old man. His brother James, the first apostle to die. John, the very last to die. And there's a lot of interesting stories in church history about John in those latter years. And we can see old John being carried in Ephesus to the church. And as he's being carried, he's saying, little children, love one another. Little children, love one another. And this comes out in his book, 1 John. Okay, there are so many other things that we wish we knew about the Master, but I guess we've been given what we need to know. If they've been written, fill the world with books, and we wouldn't have the time to read them anymore. Let's follow the Lord. Huh?
Amen. Good.
So let's head back up to the bus, and if you want to step in the church and take a look at the rock up front, you're welcome to do that. And we'll be back to the bus in about 10 minutes. Use restrooms. Use restrooms.